Good morning, Seattle. Welcome to the program. My name is Cam Steele. We're in Vancouver, British Columbia today with Richard G Patton. Welcome to the program, Richard. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Now, you've written a thought-provoking book, and it is called The Autobiography, Jesus of Nazareth and the Missing Years. I've read a little bit of it throughout the book. Fascinating.
It's quite a title, isn't it?
It is. What I'd actually like to first, before we begin into the book, the front cover of the book I find really fascinating. Can you give us a brief synopsis of where this cover came from and how you...
Well, it's a wonderful artist on Vancouver Island who, as if you believe in coincidences, I was drawn to meet this person, and a year later he called me up and said, I remember you loved this painting and I'm going to an exhibition. And he basically offered me first choice of it. And at the time, I believe he's one of the highest selling painters in Canada, and I didn't have the finance to buy it. And he just felt intuitively that I had to have this painting because I loved it so much. That he fundamentally gave it to me.
Well, it certainly suits the context of the book, which is what I'd like to get into now. What led you to writing this book?
What led me to, it's a long, involved question, which...
Can you summarize for us?
Yeah.
And what were the...
I was in India with the cousin of a fairly famous philosopher by the name of J. Krishnamurti, who is one of the giants in modern philosophy. And we were in northern India doing research into various spiritual masters.
Right.
And that's where I first came across the information that there is a tradition of the man who is akin to Jesus, having been in India for many years studying with the Brahmins. And he was referred to as the Western Dalai Lama.
Of course.
Well, this kicked off my interest, and I started doing research. And 10 years later, I had completed a screenplay, and I started trying to get it made into a screenplay, because the story that I understand is not the traditional story. The traditional story has so many holes in it. The lost years are not addressed. And it seems curious to me that the man we know as Jesus, we have his words virtually quoted verbatim, and yet suddenly there's from the age of 13 to 30, there's a huge gap. And then he comes back and he's quoted verbatim again.
And the Last Supper happens, and yeah.
Exactly, and we have to question, there's a big hole in the story. So I started doing more research around the screenplay that I was writing.
Where did you do your research?
In India, in Egypt. I accessed a lot of channeled information, the channelers that I had come across.
Right.
And they confirmed something of my intuition. And when I came to Canada about 5 years ago, I went to someone who I trusted, who is also a natural channeler, and asked, why am I interested in this period? Because I'm not a religious person per se, and I don't follow any sort of institution.
So you were never really involved in any quote-unquote metaphysical beliefs at all in your life previous to this, or?
I wouldn't go that far. Always through my life, I think with all of us, there's a thread. We know everybody's searching for something more.
Right.
I was able to clearly identify that I did that.
So this is what you wanted, more.
That's right.
Okay.
So I underwent, well, having been told by several channelers that I was actually present at the infamous meal, the final meal, which we refer to as the Last Supper. I intellectually couldn't believe it, so I thought I have to validate this for myself. So I underwent regression therapy, and after
regression therapy being,
well, undergoing hypnosis, and being regressed.
Oh, past life regression.
Past life.
Okay, past life regression.
Right.
Okay.
And I started experiencing things which initially I discarded as being my ego, or an intellectual aberration. And after a period of time, I experienced certain things that actually shook me beyond life. And I did have have experiences that validated the information I was gathering together.
So this is not out of imagination. This is just access through some real information that came through on your past life regression and hypnosis?
I don't have the dirty dishes from the Last Supper.
Right.
I have experiences of memories of, there were actually 39 people in the upper room, not the 12 that we've been informed about. I have experiences related to one of these, which I have actively pursued through my own meditations and further regression. And the reason I've written this book is because the man that we've had portrayed has been institutionalized. He was an astounding human being, probably one of the most wonder-filled human beings who have ever walked on this planet.
Christ consciousness.
Unfortunately, through the mechanism of institutions and religion, the human being was deified and removed from direct, everyday human contact. His message was very simple. He said that basically everything can be known and accessed from the heart. You don't need an intermediary, people who claim they're your masters, your, I don't want to step on too many toes here, but anybody who tells you they are an authority in any way over you, what they're doing is removing your personal power.
I was just going to say, yeah, probably taking your power away or giving your power away to someone.
Exactly.
If you're doing that, I noticed in the book that you always took it back to the heart. In the story, they were always talking about the heart, and that every man has this power in his heart, every man or woman per se.
His message was profoundly simple. Unfortunately, the victors of history write the history books, and so we believe this is the truth.
So what did he essentially do in this book during his lost years?
His last years he studied. He was led by an Indian prince of Orissa who saw him talking in the temple and recognized the spiritual giant that he was already in potential. He went to his parents and asked if he could take the child back to India where he could study with the spiritual masters of the Brahmin teachings, which he did, and he went for roughly 8 years. But there were other people with him. He studied with the Brahmins, and after mastering the Vedas and the Upanishads, the sacred Hindu texts, he then started teaching the untouchables. And at that point...
The untouchables being?
They're called the Harijans. In the caste system, they're the lowest of the low.
Okay. We might have some people out there watching that are not familiar with the untouchables. So it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not Eliot Ness.
Yeah, right.
So
the mob is after us.
Yes. So he was, around the age of 17, he started teaching the sacred teachings of the highest caste to the lowest caste. This was politically very dangerous, and they tried to assassinate him for doing this. He escaped to northern India in Ladakh. And after an extensive period of training with, I would use the term Tibetans, but they were not actually Tibetans. But he studied the ancient scriptures, the ageless teachings.
Are these the scriptures that people talk about that are lost?
Those particular ones are, they're no longer on the physical plane. This is true.
Okay.
But when we talk in terms of lost, in 325 AD there was a synod of churches, a meeting in Nicaea, which is now present-day Turkey, in which the texts that did not conform with the religion of Christianity were removed and burned, so that it expunged any reference to the human being that Jesus was, and he was a very human being. Unfortunately, what the residue that we have today is he was the Son of God made manifest, and in general we assume he was born enlightened. Right. He was a very human being, largely taught through listening. A very quiet man who many people came to. He was not delivering sermons on the Mount every 5 minutes.
Right. I want to ask you. You have no chapters in this book. It's a straight autobiography with conversations. Where do these conversations come from? Is this out of memory that you've achieved these conversations and the names?
I would say it's come together through 1/3 hard research, 1/3 channeling, and one through other people's information, and 1/3 I found that initially I was writing this as my observation from the human being, the personality that I was at that time, observing the events. As I was writing, I found information was just coming through that I had no conscious knowledge of.
Interesting.
And it was my wife who finally turned around and said, "You realize you've written the autobiography," which I had not intended to do. But
wow.
It's in order for us, we live in the most exciting times this physical universe has ever known. In order for us to go forward, we have to historically clean house. And part of that...
I agree with you, yeah.
Well, part of that is that we have to readdress one of the foundations of basically our civilization, which is Christianity. And my purpose was basically to bring back, and say literally, this was a human being who led an extraordinary life. But when he's saying that, as I do, you also can do, he was actually being literal. He wasn't being metaphoric. The only times he used abstruse terms or parables was when he was in the cities. Because outside the cities, he was safe. And he could talk openly about spiritual matters. But when he came into the city, he was stepping on the toes of the Sanhedrin, who ruled the temple.
Yeah, okay.
It's hard to comprehend now, but back then, they were big brother bar none. They controlled every minutiae of daily life. And if you didn't belong to within that framework, you were an outcast. So he was very much a rebel, and a dangerous rebel. And the fundamental reason that he was politically assassinated was because after he came back from India, and he had seen all these people bathing in the Ganges and all the sun worshippers, etc. He basically said, everybody is a son of God. Everybody has access to the God, whatever that is, through opening the heart and speaking from the heart. Now, that may not sound...
Well, it's putting people back into their mastership.
Yeah.
It's taking responsibility that they're creating their own reality, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, now that doesn't seem so radical, but back then, when the temple ruled every moment of your living life, you had to live by the laws, the Torah.
It's a controlled area.
The Jews of that day, who were a suppressed people, they were governed by the Romans, very poor people at that time, they were expected to pay the temple tax 3 times a year, and they had to purchase the temple coin, and they had to provide a cleansed sacrifice, which they inevitably bought from the temple guardians, who were all controlled by the priests.
And this is all talked about in the book?
No, this is, I'm just setting the historical background. The book goes into the human being and the immense doubts he had of his purpose. He was like all of us who are on the verge of...
him being a Christ-conscious being, and that's exactly what the book talks about, the human side of him.
Exactly.
That the fears and the doubts that were presented to him as a Christ being, similar to how we as society are Christ-conscious beings, if we could only get past our fears and doubts, or embrace the fears and doubts, as it was put in the book. I wanted to ask you, during the time that we talk about his lost years and the missing years, as Jesus of Nazareth and the missing years, there's other books out there that talk about his lost years. And I'm not going to name the names or name the authors, but what makes this book so different? Because it is. It is a lot different. I find I find the autobiography it's fascinating, and I've actually had my own self-doubts come up and gone, hold it, wait a second, I need to look at this again. From picking up other books, it's more point form, it's from the books of my experience.
Right.
Did you know that there was other books out there like that?
Yes, I am aware, and
Okay.
there's some excellent material out there. My belief is that all paths lead to the top of the mountain. Some are very hard and painful and more direct. Others take a winding route. Some take dead ends that is not a backward step. It's pacing time while the rest of consciousness progresses. I cannot say where mine differs from other people. I cannot say mine is right, theirs is wrong. This was my experience that I put down as
Right.
honestly and as clearly as possible. Without I try to take it away from any sort of metaphysical type terms.
Right, New Age.
It's not smoke and mirrors.
Right.
This is a human being who gets his feet dirty in the dust, has his doubts.
It's very thought-provoking, simply because we put him on a pedestal.
Well,
And
religion has
yes, religion has put him on a pedestal, and you're putting him as a human being
among us.
us, which is, to me, amazing.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's certainly what I feel was the purpose of this book. Without a doubt, we're all guided. There were times I had no idea where I was going, and I'd read the stuff after some of the stuff went down, and it was astounding to me. But it answered so many questions that the texts that we have now do not. For instance, how could Jesus apparently have gone into the temple, overturned the moneylenders, which is the heart of the temple, caused the riot, and yet only hours later they need an insider to identify this doe-eyed speaker of love and gentleness.
Yeah.
And someone, Judas Iscariot, who has been with him for 3 years and apparently seen him walking on waters, raising people from the dead, and the loaves and fishes. He's seen all this. And this person we are led to believe, is going to hand over this wonderful magician for a handful of money. There are just too many gaps.
Yeah.
And I found the information that I was able to access explained all of those contradictions.
I enjoy it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I really do. Can you give us a brief outline of what a person, of how you feel a person should read this book, and on what kind of attitude to have when going into it?
No.
You can't?
No.
Okay.
The reaction I've had to the book, I had expected a huge backlash. I have been referred to on the internet as the precursor to the Antichrist. But people that have sent me emails and stuff that have actually read the book have had personal revelations, and for me, that's the only validation I need.
Well, that's similar to what I've had, a revelation of how I put Jesus on a pedestal.
See, my understanding of a miracle is a changing consciousness. A child naturally knows this. A child will see the wonder in everything, will pick up something very simple and see the miraculous in it. A raindrop, a little weed that's growing in the garden, they poured water onto a little bit of sand and a little blue flower comes up, which we, in our intellect, know is a weed and should be got out of the garden.
Right.
To the child, this is wonder. This is God manifest. And that's why he referred so many times to the children. And it's a matter of changing our point of view. Who we are we are all spiritual giants. We are all spiritual giants, and we have a cloak of forgetfulness around us.
Yeah. The message is very clear. What is your favorite part out of this story? What's Richard Patton's favorite part of it? What was the revelation for you in writing this?
That's a very hard question. I think truth is something that is experienced, and the mind has no access to it. Mind has access to knowledge; it doesn't have access to wisdom.
Right.
So this whole
From here.
exactly the whole book is an ongoing process. I can't tell you the process. The path is the way.
Mm-hmm.
It is never finished. There is no ultimate goal. Walking the path is all that is necessary.
It's often said that a destination there is no such thing as a destination because it's an ongoing process.
Exactly.
Similar to what Jesus was about, not having a destination to go to, but just being in that place. Richard, this is a great pleasure to have you here. I noticed on the back of the book here, you've got a guarantee. I've never seen this, and I find a lot of integrity in this book, and integrity in what you've done here. If for any reason the purchaser of this book is not completely satisfied, you're going to give them their money back and say thank you very much, and that's that.
It is a complete refund. Undertaking the book in the first place, I realized that it was a very dangerous venture because I'm standing on a lot of 2,000 years of history which we accept as truth, and some very big religious toes. It was a daunting task to even begin, and so we decided that if people were offended, and which could easily do, that is not the purpose of the book.
Certainly, yeah.
So we offered this full refund.
Well, Richard, thank you for coming on our program. If people want to attain this book from you, this show is in Seattle. Is there any bookstores in Seattle that it's in, or can we do mail order?
We're mainly doing it through the internet, which is a wonderful bookstore in Seattle, in fact, is Amazon.com.
Amazon.com?
It's one of these virtual bookstores, but they're great.
And if they want to reach you, is there a number that we can contact you?
There is. There's area code 604 253 3283.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I thought the camera was going to be on me, but it's not on me.
It's been a pleasure, Cameron.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Good job.
I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, it was perfect.
Oh, thank you.
It was perfect.